Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitInwriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
We'll start with an introduction. Our guest today is Peter Chaikin. He is an industry veteran. How's that for a hackneyed cliche? Your career path has been all over the place.
Yeah.
Currently, you are a videographer, you're a music industry consultant, you're a pro audio consultant. You spent many years at JBL.
Right.
Before that, you were at Yamaha. Is that right?
There was a brief hop to Alesis, 2 years at Alesis.
Oh, that's right. That's right. What years were you at Alesis?
99 to 2001. When you were at Tascam.
I was at, no, actually. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. I was at Tascam. And prior to that, when Alesis was a little company in Culver City, I was at Hybrid Arts, right down the block from Alesis.
Right.
But yeah, we've been chatting about this off camera, that we have these very, very parallel paths in a lot of ways.
And then there's a whole chapter before Yamaha, Alesis, JBL, which was, I was a freelance recording engineer in LA for 15 years.
Around the corner from where I was a recording engineer in LA.
Well, I was anywhere that that it was
yes.
happening.
And those were completely different days in so many ways. I mean, forget all the stories and all the craziness and everything, but the technology was a lot different.
Yeah.
And you also made the transition. And I say transition because it sure wasn't a jump, but it was, from tape-based to nonlinear in the creative world. And that, for me at least, really completely changed the equation, not only in terms of technology, but in terms of how people worked.
Right.
We went from, my first boss was an absolute master at editing 2-inch tape, which was something that, no matter how many times I did it, left me with a feeling of abject terror just before I made the cut.
Oh, I loved it.
I was always terrified that I was going to make just the wrong cut and never be able to undo it. And that's the thing that I loved about the transition to digital. So I could go back.
Well, and in honesty, I didn't make the transition until much, much later, because I went from being an engineer to product development at Yamaha. And it probably wasn't until my JBL days, I was there for 17 years, but much, much later did I start to get my hands back into it and say, roll tape, and there's no tape. And so at that point, I'm learning Pro Tools. But for me, simultaneous Final Cut, Adobe Premiere, because as a photographer, I was applying that, I was using that through my manufacturing days to tell stories about products, success of products.
Well, let's back up a little bit.
And also, there was a chapter between the old analog and the new digital, which was MIDI. And that, you talk about changing the landscape. I think
That's what really started it.
Yeah. And for me, when MIDI really took hold and empowered musicians, obviously, to do all kinds of things, it also started to mean that you didn't always have multiple people cutting tracks in the room at the same time. And I was really fortunate. Some of my clients were, I've done lots and lots of work, and as they transitioned into MIDI, I felt less, I love them and I love people. And for me, ultimately, that's what it's about. It's the relationships. But I felt less engaged in rolling tape to stripe a track with a synth or with drums or whatever. And about that time, there was kind of this connection with Yamaha through an artist that I was working with, a great, great artist, Patrice, Russian.
Oh,
I did 5 albums with her.
Wonderful, incredibly talented, Mm-hmm.
And she was an endorsee. I don't know whether the term is they endorsed her or she endorsed them.
She's an endorser.
She's an
Yes.
endorser. And she's a rock star. But
Yeah.
the point is that she had a very good relationship with Yamaha in the keyboard area. And they were getting deep into the digital audio area in the early phases of digital for studios.
Yes.
You know, they were making their own LSIs, and they'd come to the sessions. And I kind of had a relationship with this one guy, and they invited me to come up there and lead product development in the recording domain, which Yamaha was really, you know, they were big in live sound. They were great in keyboards, obviously, drums. They were good fight in guitars. Their acoustics were legendary.
Yes.
But the early digital products from Yamaha, the Rev 7, the SPX 90, so there was the analog, everything was analog, and there was MIDI in there.
Which was the bridge to digital in that sense.
Yeah, in a sense. In fact, all the sequencers became audio sequencing
yes.
programs.
But what I want to ask you about, because that's an interesting transition, going from the studio, where you're involved in the creative process, to going to manufacturing. Was that an odd transition for you mentally to make?
You know, there are two experiences. There's the experience of looking out at something and it's kind of two-dimensional and you think you know what it is. Then there's the experience of being in it. And there was some fear. I said, God, I don't want to leave the creative world. I love the creative world, but everything's kind of changing. And
were you intimidated by the corporate aspect of it?
No, I wasn't really. And they made me feel very welcome because they wanted what I could offer, which was input from the street. Not just what should the product be, but, you know, basically when I got there, they didn't understand, you know, I don't want to, this is not slagging, this is just, didn't understand that when you're recording, you're listening through a tape machine, to the back end of the tape machine, and that the sum of all the microphones are married through the tape machine. It might be one mic to one track, it might be 20 mics to one track. But the point is that you're always listening to the tracks, whether they're on input or whether they're playing back.
Sure.
And that was a revelation for them because in the live world, you're listening to buses,
right?
But you're listening to live input all the time. The point is that the difference between the live workflow and the recording workflow, aside from the fact that you get a chance in the control room to do it again,
right?
Maybe. So the point was that they wanted to know what I could tell them about how it is, and it's not just the equipment. I mean, part of what you want them to understand is what's going on. Here,
the perspective,
and here,
yeah,
and here in the artist's mind.
That's the creative process.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is what drew me to the recording process in general, the process of production.
Right.
And I think you have an interesting point there because a lot of the companies, not just Yamaha, but you know JBL and a lot of and Avid and so many of these companies, they intentionally seek out people who are working, quote unquote, in the trenches because they want that understanding of the nebulous, you know, the stuff that you really can't put a finger on, but this is the experience that I've had because I've been working in this for so long.
What are you thinking about when you're doing it? And where is your attention? And what's the muscle memory? You can't, as Jerry Cheddar, who hired me at Yamaha, said, you know, I can teach you Excel and the business side and marketing, but I don't think I could teach a marketing guy what you know. And it's not just know, it's the environment that you feel comfortable in every day. And that became, you know, that became really useful to me, but it became very useful to the companies I was working for. But point is, you said, how was that transition? There was some fear. You know, we marinated for about a year and then I finally came on board. But when I was in it, not looking out at it, was an extension of what we were doing in the studio, because the product development process,
Yes.
particularly if you're in on the ground floor, is very creative. It's not just creative in terms of what the product's going to be, but it's creative in terms of how do you validate that? And that has to do with your artist relationships, your peers and friends from the studio, going back to them and working with them. But it also has to do with just validating that you're on the right path at different stages. So many times, particularly in the later days of product development, they're more commoditized, and they're not. I was really fortunate to work on innovative, groundbreaking products all through my career. And the point is that you can't commoditize those. It's not like you're looking at something else out there and saying, we need to do that at a lower price with more buttons. No. We need to solve problems. We need to give tools to people, the creative tools that they need to carve tracks.
And to your point, especially if you're working on something that's a paradigm shift.
Right.
I worked on some of the first USB controllers for DAWs.
Right.
Same thing.
Right.
There was this
Right.
complete paradigm shift of, so you mean I can have a tactile work surface?
Right.
And the fact that you could finally move a fader down here and it would move on the screen, that was
mind-blowing.
it really was,
It was mind-blowing.
And I think, yes, the both of us were fortunate enough to work on these products that I think were, in that sense, paradigm shifts. And that, you're right, that does really help to bridge those worlds a whole lot.
Yeah. But to get back to the point about the transition, I see it all as like a spectrum, a continuous spectrum of creativity. And no matter who you're talking to, whether you're talking to an author or a dancer or a musician or a mix engineer or a product development person or an electrical engineer who's designing a circuit or an industrial design, there are places on that continuum where they live that's adjacent to where you are. And you get to bring all kinds of skills. I mean, I got bitten by the studio thing big time as a kid on Long Island, and knew I had to be in the studio and set my sights on that and went about doing that and did it. But I also got bitten by photography big time and studied with a guy who developed the first Kodak emulsions, color emulsions.
Oh, wow. So you were into
Yeah.
that at an early phase too.
Yeah,
okay.
and so you get to use all of guitar. It started at age 9, went up to camp and got bitten, had to play guitar, drove everybody
Sure.
crazy playing the same 3 chords on a little Stella nylon string guitar.
You knew all 3?
2 of them really good.
Okay.
One of them not. But the point is that all of these things that you develop, you bring that perspective and those skills to whatever you're doing. And so at Yamaha photography, I found that once we launched a product and I saw the joy and the success and in somebody's eyes and the things we were doing, I'd want to document that in a way that, industrials are common today. But back then, for me, it was more like going out and shooting a documentary. And I made films in college, or I worked on films. In fact, somebody just sent me the very first thing I ever worked on at school.
Ooh.
Sound that I did. I ran a recording lab, and he came in with his movie, and I wound up doing sound for it. But the point is that became a really useful way of telling a story about a product that isn't text, and it's not exactly photographs, and it's not a press release. It's seeing a thing in action.
And it's a real world perspective in that sense
Yeah.
too. That's what I've always liked about doing quote unquote documentaries.
Right.
But to your point, because there's a bigger aspect of that I think is really interesting, which is that when we're young, we're focused on a certain thing that we want to do, that we want to be, whatever that is, because you think, oh, well, this is what I like. This is what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a guitar player. I'm going to be a photographer, whatever it is.
Right.
And eventually you start realizing that, well, first of all, because we are to a certain extent autodidactic, we are constantly stimulated by new things, short attention span theater,
that's
I call it.
That's your shiny object.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, you're like, oh, I love playing guitar. Ooh, that would make a great photo, squirrel, that kind of thing. And ultimately what happens is that all of these different aspects, all of these different interests tend to color what we end up being. And, we were talking before about how should I introduce you, You, like myself, I've just started calling myself a music industry consultant because, there are so many facets to what we do because of all the things we've done and all the influences we bring to it. And I think that's a lot of times I ask people, what would 15-year-old you think of you now? 15-year-old me would have been absolutely just like, no, come on, seriously? Because there's just so much that you take in over this time and your interests just keep broadening. And I think that's, who the hell's going to predict where you're going to be? And yet we try to when we're young,
The other thing about it is that as you're, if you want something and you want to do it, I'm convinced that if you're passionate about it and you're persistent, the people that show up.
Yep.
I mean, I used to call, as a kid, Phil Ramone on the phone because I saw his name on the back of an album. This is in the 60s. And
I bet he was nice to you too, because he was
he
a hell
would
of a...
always come to the phone. Would always come to the phone, and he gave me names. And he, when I hitched cross country, I wound up at the record plant, which was a connection that he gave me. And then years later, I worked with him.
He was the first one to let me sit and watch him work in the studio when I really wasn't supposed to be, but he was like, yeah, okay,
Oh, he was,
and I learned so much just from watching him about the stuff that you can't learn.
Right.
I mean, I've said it a million times. School can teach you how to run a compressor, but it can't teach you when to keep your mouth shut. And there was so much of that going on in the creative process. And that's what I was fascinated about. I mean, I was fascinated by the gear, but I was also fascinated by how we use that gear to create a work of art.
Circling back to your question, I do believe that if you want something real bad, it's been my experience that you can have it. You've got to be single-minded, you've got to be persistent, you've got to keep showing up, and it'll happen.
Mm-hmm.
The 360 thing for me is once you're inside something, you start to see and experience things that you didn't realize from the outside.
Absolutely.
In New York as a kid, on Long Island as a kid, looking at Hollywood, it was like, it was both exciting and a little fearful. I didn't know anybody here.
Sure.
But once you're connected and you're hearing music come over the speakers, all of that disappears. Once you're connected with a client and you've got a good relationship, you're rowing together, trying to do something to fulfill her dream, her goals. And so the point is that the 15-year-old kid, what I would say to that 15-year-old kid is, don't get stuck thinking about it. Do something. Do something, because at the very least, you're going to find out whether or not it's more of what you want, in the direction of what you want, or not what you want at all. But you can't sit around and ruminate and be static about it. Every step you take, and again, if you do know what you want, you can have that. But every step you take is a step towards more information, more knowledge.
Yes. And I think, to your point, a lot of times what happens is you think you know what you want, and then you get there and you think, oh, you know what? This is not quite what I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And part of what makes us who we are is there's a certain empathy in terms of being, the classic definition of empathy, being able to understand and put yourself in this other position. And I think for me, having been the musician in the studio, watching the creative process happen that way, I was really fascinated with what's that guy doing behind the mixing console, right? But I was also fascinated with what's this guy doing with me in terms of helping me to shape my
Right.
pretty objects,
Right.
you know? And when you say, you know, finding that artist and helping her develop her dream, that's what this is. And there's this whole process that involves both the, you know, the technical, the left brain stuff, as well as the right brain, just let it unfold kind of stuff. And I think, you know, that's part of, I mean, for us, that's part of merging those worlds.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that, as you say, for myself as well, until I got into the manufacturing side of things, I didn't realize how much of that right brain creativity there is in that product development and all of that.
You know, I found, and particularly the larger the companies, I spent the majority of my time marketing back to the people I worked with.
Yep.
I used to say marketing starts at home.
It's so true, man.
You know, you don't get what you need if everybody's not rowing in the same direction. And so a certain amount of time is about getting them jazzed and making sure they understand about the potential and the success. And sometimes they don't understand it, and particularly if they're in the financial area, if they're in the, and getting everybody to row together. So part of it, bringing back these movies of people, you know, of Frank Filippetti, Pavarotti in Italy, who shot this huge making of. That, you know, whether or not they understood recording, they understood the success, the potential, and you know, back to what you were saying before about helping somebody realize their dream. That's what you're doing in the manufacturing side too.
It's so true.
You know, you're developing a product that hopefully solves a problem or makes it easier or makes it, or gives a new tool or a new capability to an artist that they didn't have before.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, really? So you use it, whatever you think it's going to be. If you think that working for a manufacturer is that you see this big assembly line and they're stamping chassis and soldering, and no, it starts with teams and cooperation and interaction with the people around you, and a lot of time spent educating them.
Yeah, and it starts with a lot of, you know, harebrained ideas, you know, sketching stuff on napkins.
Yeah, but what happens on that journey, and for me it was 30 years, 10 years at Yamaha, 2 years at Alesis, 17 years at Harman, JBL, you get pretty good at marketing. And I don't mean creating an ad. There are other people around that do that kind of thing. I mean,
Human marketing.
Yeah, well, the internal marketing,
Yes.
but also you learn marketing, you learn finances, you learn operations, you learn, you know, at JBL, under one of our leaders, we were responsible for every aspect of a product, right down to when's it going to ship? When's it going to ship? What's going on in the factory? What do they need? Oh, they're short this component. And as a ex-musician, ex-recording engineer, to be able to convince financial people, you learn where all the touch points are in the chain that have to be solved. And they want to know that that's healthy.
Yeah.
So the point is that whatever you think manufacturing is, it's a lot of things. In product development, it's a lot of things. And you have to take ownership for the baby, for the success of that product. And sometimes that means margins, you know, profit margins. Sometimes it means relationships with dealers. Sometimes it means making sure that the dealer is excited about the product before it comes out so that they get behind it and you've got a campaign. It's not reactive. It's proactive.
It's proactive. And in fact, you find, you know, at least for me as a product manager, I found that I was more involved with aspects than I expected to be.
Right.
So I ended up writing all the marketing materials, all the ads, everything else, and doing the manual and all of this other stuff. So this was, to me, you know, bottom line was because I ended up getting involved in all of these different aspects. I learned a lot of stuff that I didn't know. But you really do, you learn all of these different aspects that you don't necessarily think about.
Yeah.
And you learn, I call it the big picture, basically.
Yeah.
You zoom out and
Yeah.
you can, and what I love about that also, what I think is so important about that is that in learning these different jobs, even if you're not doing them yourself, you understand what your place does in terms of how it connects to all these other aspects. You know, you understand how, as a product manager, what you're doing impacts manufacturing, impacts PR, impacts marketing, impacts all these different aspects. Right. And that, I think, that's the creative process right there in terms of how it relates to marketing, to manufacturing, rather.
If everybody has a stake in this thing becoming a product and being successful, then you're all respecting and listening for what somebody needs and why this particular area, what the blocks are in this area.
Yeah.
So as a director of marketing is two things. People think marketing is outbound communications, ads and PR and outbound.
That's part of it.
Talking about, but marketing is also inbound. It's having a very good understanding of what the need is. It's also having a sense of who you're competing against. It's also having a sense of how large is that market, and all of that, in the solution that you're developing, it's all got to fit in that context. So
there's a human psychology aspect to it that I think is really often overlooked.
Right.
I was always drawn to, things like the Clio Awards, and I was never a marketing guy in that sense until I started doing it myself. But I was always fascinated by the fact that you got these great ads that people create that are not just, either an earworm or, amusing or something like that, but they really appeal to a certain aspect of the psyche of the potential user. And when you're talking about a highly specialized field like the one we have, you were talking earlier about, teaching a marketing person versus teaching a professional to market. I had a mentor for many years, a guy named John Sternberg, who was a wonderful, wonderful person. And one of the things that he used to tell me all the time is, there are people who come into this industry as marketers, and they never quite get it because it's a completely different world. It's a completely different language. It's a completely different mindset.
Right.
And as you say, it's easier for someone like us to learn to understand that psychological aspect of what is marketing than it is for a marketing person to learn and understand that psychological aspect of what is it to be a creative artist / musician / whatever. Because that shit you either understand or you don't. There are wonderful people out there who just don't have an artistic bent.
Right.
And I think it's hard for them sometimes to understand the mindset.
Yeah, and depending on how large the company is that you're operating in, you have resources available. So if a company is working with your firm, what you're looking for in that person in the company, hopefully that person was a hands-on professional, can explain the heart and mind of the end user or the retail partner that you have to market to, right?
Right.
And it's your firm's project, task, goal to understand all of that and come up with a visual representation that's going to touch the nerves of the customer, right? Mm-hmm. And what I'm thinking of is where we are now. You talk about the circuitous path, or I'm trying to remember the word you...
Circumlocucious.
We're certainly doing
great Scrabble word.
So now in third phase of my career, I'm now concentrating on telling stories to give voice to creatives. Mm-hmm. There's nothing I enjoy more than making a documentary or a film that captures the moment that's going to help that person express, this is what I do. Yeah. And so a big marketing firm has all kinds of channels. There's the print channel, there's the digital social channels, there's radio, there's TV, you know of channels that I'm probably not even aware of, slipping fortunes into fortune cookies.
Whatever it takes, man. Yeah.
And what I've decided for me, what's really fun is understanding the creative goal of somebody and making a film, helping them, giving them something that they can use to say, this is what we're doing. This is what I'm up against. This is the baby I'm working on.
Yeah.
I love that. I love document. So it's all, and for me, I'm very lucky. I've had relationships from my recording days. Those clients I wound up working with as we were developing products, and some of those people I'm still working with now, tagging along with them and making movies about what they're doing.
Such a pleasure, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but it is a continuum. So
Yeah.
I wanted to be a recording engineer. I hitched cross country with the Billboard director of studios, and I stopped in different cities looking for openings at studios and wound up in LA. I
just went straight to LA with the same billboard.
And some of the stories you told me, you came in style, so to speak. No double.
It's been an adventure, yes.
But I couldn't have foreseen going to work in product development. We'll call it marketing with a manufacturer.
Absolutely. I used to always be down on myself for the fact that I couldn't focus on one thing for very long. And then I realized, oh, but wait a minute, I have been focusing on one thing. It's just a really big thing. And it's really all-encompassing because
there are a lot of components in there.
Exactly, and it helps you to understand all of what's going on. And that's why I think, 15-year-old us, what do you say? Except just show up and try stuff, and just be open to every adventure you can.
And if you have an idea that you really want to do something, do it.
Yeah.
If you're playing in a band, I thought we were going to play. I thought we were going to keep playing. We were going to go up to the Catskills. Then we were going to travel to the U.S. And then we were going to go to Europe. And
I played Vegas, actually.
Did you?
Yeah, I was in a cover band. We would come to Vegas for 2-week stints in late '80s. I lived right up the street from you here, and we would go to Vegas, and we had a band that played the lounge at the Frontier, opening for Siegfried and Roy.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a much different city then, of course.
Yeah, that was real.
But again, it's like I did it because I wanted the experience, and I was
you
paying.
Loved it though,
yeah,
right?
I did.
Did you, or I should say, did you love it?
I did. Actually.
Did you love playing and singing?
Oh, I've always loved playing and singing. Yeah,
Right.
I've been in a number of bands, and that was one of my things. Was that I really I was one of those bass players that didn't sit in the corner and stand in the corner and be quiet. I was not the John Entwistle type in that sense. I was acrobatic, shall we say? Bouncing off the speaker cabinets and everything. Right. But I loved being on stage.
So, question for you: if you loved that, and for me in high school, being in bands and playing, there was nothing else I wanted to do.
Right.
What made you leave that and do something else?
Number one, I wanted to get off the road. And number two, I really, really fell in love with the engineering aspect of it. I really dug it.
Right.
And so I just wanted to get into a different thing.
Yeah.
And so, same as for you, it was just, it was a new perspective on something.
Yeah.
And isn't that really what keeps happening for you? You just say, oh yeah, this is kind of cool. Oh, maybe I'll try that.
Yeah. 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 And I think when these things happen, hopefully there's something pulling you. So there's something that you see that you want. For
Always.
me, the engineering, it was like, bam.
Yeah.
The manufacturing, by the time I was getting close to doing it, the involvement and the part of the process and being included in developing early digital stuff was so much fun.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
makes you take the leap, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully there's something that you see that you couldn't have seen not having started that. I say marinating. I got to kind of experience it before I made the decision.
Yeah, well,
You know,
and
there's
a
a
similar
little of
thing
that.
happened to me as well because I was doing artist relations for Shure microphones in Europe, but I was also beta testing for Steinberg. Being involved in that, in the development process
Right.
to that point, and also having then had that tie into Shure, who were developing at that point new microphones and
Right.
other new technologies, I was starting to get this inkling of what the manufacturing side was like, and as you say,
Right.
how it related to me as an artist.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that, I think, it's interesting that we're talking about this because I just literally did a panel this weekend with two of your former colleagues. Well, actually, I don't know if she was there when you were there, but Daniela, who is now at Harman from Rat Sound, and Becky
Becky, sure.
Barabas,
Yeah.
and Ivana Manley. And the four of us were doing a mentoring panel on jobs in manufacturing.
For Sound Girls?
For Sound Girls, yeah.
Right.
And, this was a lot of that conversation too, is,
Right.
understanding how that all relates to, the creative process, because people don't realize that.
The hard thing, and I have a little bit of a luxury because at this point in my life, I'm doing what I love doing. But the hard part is I picture you on that panel, and the kids probably want to know, what should I do? What is this? What is the next move? And all of those things vary according to what it is you're going to do, who you're going to work for, who you want to work for, what you want to be. Do you write a resume? Do you do this? Do you do this? Do you do this? And the thing that I keep coming back to is, and you said a moment ago about showing up, that what happens, if at all possible, if you can get in front of the person who's making the decision, that's more important, that they see who you are and that they see how passionate you are and get a sense of that the lights are on.
Yes.
All the other things, you gotta, those are perfunctory things. You've got to maybe do those to get in the door. But the most important thing is to show up and have a one-to-one exchange. I have always felt that being face-to-face with somebody and having an exchange is, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
A human interaction is worth a universe.
And to extend on that, I think not just showing up and having that interaction, but being 100% present.
Yeah.
Because I think that is, especially, a lot of people have a short attention span, including us, But I think it's important to be, at certain moments, it's important to be just plugged into that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And plugged, like when you're working with an artist.
Right.
The idea of, this is what's going on right now. This is what I'm focused on. And by doing that, you gain so much because you're really, truly immersed in that moment.
Right, right.
And then you share that experience to such a deeper level.
So right. The person that you're interviewing with, that person has a baby, has a stake.
Yeah.
They're trying to get somewhere.
Exactly.
And when you listen, you learn, yourself starts to latch onto that thing.
Yep.
I don't know whether this is really, what do you call, what's the word where you're being, there's a word, meaning not respectful. But
disingenuous?
no,
Asshole?
well, the point is that I used to think of my jobs as I worked within a host organism, and I would latch on because they are large corporations that have other interests other than your little area.
Sure.
Sure. People in big decision-making positions, the executive board may not even know that the company is doing this, and certainly will not understand if you try to say, well, there are buses and no. But the point is that you're within a host organism, and you want some nourishment for yourself. So you're taking nourishment for yourself, and what you're trying to do is make a difference while you're there. And eventually, the host may wake up and shake you off. It runs a course. For me, I knew after 10 years at Yamaha that there were some different things I wanted in a product development job. Loved the people and still do. But the point is that things run their course.
Yeah.
And, and they may outgrow you, you may outgrow them. But while you're there, you're trying to get the resources you need to make a difference.
Yeah.
And part of it is, and you also want some satisfaction out of it, or you're not going to keep doing it. But for me, it was always, we got this opportunity. We can do this. We can win this. Here are the competitors, and it's this big, and I think we can. But you're trying to get the resources, and there are moments in time where the host wants to listen to what you have to say and is willing to bet some bucks on that for 3, 5 years, 10 years, whatever.
Fleeting moments, but yeah.
The great thing about Yamaha was that they set their sights on something, and it was very deliberate. One thing after another.
Absolutely.
5 years.
Dogmatic.
Where do we want to be?
Yeah.
And they would make it happen. But the point is, so this notion of working within a corporation is like the corporation is like a host organism.
It's an interesting perspective.
Yeah,
I never really thought of it that way. Well, and especially for a larger corporation, corporations like the ones you've been at, Harman, Yamaha, because they have so many different tentacles.
Right.
When I worked at Tascam, it was the same way because it was a subdivision of TIAC.
Right.
So, they had an airborne division, they had a data storage unit, all of these other kind of, and so yes, you were a small part of that bigger organism.
In the beginning, you're working for somebody who needs your help. Yeah. Later, as you grow, you're petitioning for the resources you need to do something.
And you have to justify every single bit of that
right.
to people who may not understand it.
And the organism has to live, whether they're a public corporation, and have to please their shareholders. You just want the chance to do something good. You want, and to be given a shot to do something good. I've always been very fortunate. And at some point, it's their company.
Yes.
And you can't make the mistake of thinking it's yours, it's your product. And there are a lot of people involved in making a successful product also, the engineers for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Who are you? You're just kind of giving a perspective as the product. So, but what's the word I'm looking for? Sacrilegious.
Oh, sure.
It's sacrilegious when you're talking about developing product to say that the people who sponsor you and give you the resources to
don't have a clue.
Well, that they are the host.
They are.
And you gotta get what you need. You gotta figure out how to get what you need.
It's true, and to a certain extent, if you think about it, why are they bringing you in? Because you have that specialized knowledge to oversee that particular little niche that you're overseeing at that time. The same way, I was brought in because I understood digital audio workstations,
right.
which were still a pretty new thing at the turn of the century.
Right.
And I understood computers, which were also
a pretty new thing in the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. And, so being able to merge those worlds with the creative process,
right.
And, same thing for you. You
right.
came in with an understanding of these different facets. And that's why I love the idea of, that's why I always, when I'm talking to students, I always encourage them, man, just do as many things as you think, even if you think it has nothing to do with what I had an interview with a woman yesterday who's a mastering engineer. And I did a little bit of research on her beforehand, and I discovered she had a degree in psychology. I said, you
That's
know,
interesting.
yeah, that must have been really useful if you think about it,
Yeah.
working with artists.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the same way, I mean, I dabbled in, I took a class in psychology, but man, it helped me to understand a lot about marketing, about how you're trying to appeal to a certain aspect of a person's brain, And again, the creative
Right.
brain is so different,
Right.
wired completely differently in that sense.
Right. How does psychology, well, we're getting really off track, but I'm curious how psychology, I can certainly see it in a recording session, but how would that play into being a mastering? How do those,
I asked that same question, and she gave me a very good answer, which is that she said, when you're working with the artist, especially in mastering, because mastering is still sort of a black art in that sense, you're able to understand a little bit more about what they're asking for.
right,
When you were in the studio, I'm sure you went through this too, but I had a guitar player once ask me to make his guitar sound a little more brown. I
Yeah.
mean, understanding
yeah,
that nebulous,
yeah,
Yeah. I think that there's something really important about that, and it's interesting because one of the very first interviews I did for this show was with a dear friend of mine, whom I've known for about 30 years now, a producer by the name of Michael Beinhorn.
oh yeah,
And Michael
He's
and
a great guy.
and Michael and I have had this ongoing conversation for years, which we call our "Why the Industry Sucks" conversation. Because we're a bunch of we're a couple of old guys saying "Get off my lawn," basically. But we talk a lot about drawing a performance out of somebody, and Michael's got great stories about that. I don't know if you've ever heard his story about getting a vocal out of Chris Cornell for Black Hole Sun.
no,
He sat down and played him Frank Sinatra beforehand. And Chris was like, what the fuck? That's awful, right? But then he went in, and if you listen to the isolated vocal, he's crooning.
wow,
It's little stuff like that that I think appeals so much to
right,
those aspects that
Right.
we normally don't touch.
right,
I think psychology is so intrinsic to the creative process. And what you've just said, I mean, to bring it full circle, it's so intrinsic to the creative process of designing gear as well. Because, you're really putting yourself into that creative space
Yeah.
in a way that, like when I was working on the BOM for these, not just the BOM, but the design for these controllers, Okay, well, we did the first generation, and the first thing we figured out was, oh, so if you have banks of faders and you switch to a different bank and you have just, non-moving faders and you touch that fader, all of a sudden your mix is fucked up. Oops. Guess we better design moving faders into this thing, And so my next generation of them was a Firewire version with moving faders.
right,
But this is something that you have to grok by being involved in it, so that I would sit down and do a session with it.
right, right, right. And there's nobody else within that company who is better equipped to sit in that chair and learn and say, oh, I know.
Than people
see
who've
where-
already done it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then you in that case, because you were bringing everything. You could talk their language.
Yeah.
You had the psychology of talking to people who may not understand.
Yeah. Exactly. And there you get into the whole idea of, always being able to connect to others and networking with people. And that's another thing that I think is so important for
Yeah.
students.
Yeah.
It's just don't burn bridges, man.
Yeah.
Be known as the person that is always going to be willing to be there.
Yeah.
Who's always interested in something. Because, man, that's the thing. I call people who, I call people nowadays and they say to me, oh, sure, man, because it's you. Most of the time that's because there are people who I've had on my show who would not do any other interviews.
Right.
You know,
Well, and you bring credibility. It's not even you bring credibility. You're the real deal. When you walk in a room to interview somebody who could have been your peer or could have been in the trenches beside you, they know that you know what they're talking about. And I think some of the difficulty of some of the companies is pro audio is small. We're not
Yeah.
selling shoes.
Yeah.
You know, as Chris Stone used to say, we're not selling shoes. And it goes back to having had your hands in here, you carry that with you, that credibility that gives you entree and comfort and respect with all these people that you're interviewing now, because you could, you know, to a greater or lesser extent, you could sit in their chair and maybe not craft what they craft, but completely understand the gig.
If not sitting in their chair, sitting in the adjacent chair.
Right.
That's it, exactly. You know, it's like when I did artist relations. Now, I've only done live sound a couple of times. Frankly, it took me twice to realize that, oh shit, I don't ever want to do this gig, right?
It's not
terrifying.
for the faint of heart.
It's really not, you know. And having come up in the studios where you get a do-over, you know, but at the same time, I know so many front of house people,
Right.
you know, and so I've been standing next to them for a concert, you know. I know what they're going through, and I understand the pain points. And so even though I don't have the experience to, you know, don't put me in front of a desk to mix a major band, I'll be terrified. But at the same time, I get the gig.
Right.
You know, I understand
Right.
the gig.
Right.
And I think that's so important. And from your perspective as well, you know, maybe you haven't done every one of these gigs to a deep extent, but you're able to put yourself in the position of the person who does.
Right.
And that is empowering as all hell.
Yeah, and it gives you access to those people because there's a sense of trust there.
Yeah.
You're not walking in flat-footed off the street. You know, they know. So to the extent that you don't understand it, you can partner with these people who can speak for you.
Yeah.
Whether it's in video or a recording or a press release or whatever. Mm-hmm. But you wouldn't have that access had you not understood their world.
It's true. It's true.
And you couldn't have foreseen that you would now need that relationship for something other than you did when you wanted to do this.
Well, because who can foresee what's coming up in that
Right.
sense, you know?
Right.
But I think for both of us, it's a certain satisfaction with our evolution.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's what's so difficult when you're young, when you're first starting out, is to realize that ultimately it's going to be that old cliche about making plans while the universe laughs, you know. Things are going to happen. Serendipity is going to be there at the weirdest times when you don't expect it, you know, and some incident is going to lead to something else, even if you don't realize it at the time. A week, a month, 10 years later, it could come back full circle and be the seed for something else.
Yeah.
You know, and really, I think that's what's so beautiful about a career in this industry.
Yeah.
Because there's so much of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I personally, I think, you know, I'm so grateful to have had such a weird and wacky and circumlocucious career.
Right.
I know you are too, you know, makes us who we are.
I feel very, very lucky because, and when you're doing something, you can't always see the possibilities.
Yeah.
You know, what's the next thing and what do I do if this falls apart? And it always works out. I do have to say that depending on who you're working for, the working environment and their goals and their resources, it can be very stressful.
Oh gosh.
It can be really stressful.
Incredibly stressful, yeah.
And what that tends to do, it wasn't until I decided not to be in the corporate world anymore that things started to make sense to me. I mean, there's this little thing that I keep here to remind me that when you're the little Chinese finger torture, when you're in something and you're pulling so hard to make it work, you're just doing everything, that really what you need to do is take a deep breath. And when you do take it, this thing's old and broken. When you take a deep breath, the thing relaxes, and then you can have some perspective. So when you're in that stressful place, meditation helps.
Yeah.
by the way.
Yeah.
Big fan. Started at the Village when the Maharishi was in town.
Oh, wow.
That's when I learned David Lynch was my checker. The point is that anything that you can do to clear your mind and relax and take some of the tension away, hopefully you're not doing yourself in, you're not blaming yourself for what it is you're tense about. That gives you perspective. And then you can go back to whatever it is you're doing with kind of a,
Yeah.
I know what this is. Sometimes walking away from something, coming back the next day and looking at it and saying, that's what's wrong.
But
Sleeping on it.
But being the obsessive people we are, sometimes that's hard to do because we keep pulling.
Oh, it's like working on a mix all night,
Oh, man.
thinking you're going to
Yeah.
make it better when really, if you got some sleep and came back the next day, if it's still on the board,
Right.
you could knock it out in an hour.
Yeah.
That's really served me well. Knowing when to get away and let the thing relax and come back to it. That's a big one. But so the point is that you don't always know where it's going. And for me, leaving the corporate world has given me the chance to get on top of things and bringing back the point that, I'm really grateful for the whole trajectory. And I see how it all made sense. When you're down in it, you may not see how it all makes sense.
You probably don't, because that's just it. You're down in it, and
Right.
you really have to be able to zoom out. And that's not always easy to do. But I think the more different things you've done, the easier that becomes, because maybe it just gives you those coordinates or whatever it is. But when you're able to zoom out a little bit and see where it all fits together, it makes so much sense. It really does. And I mean, I know that a lot of the people who watch these are younger people, and a lot of this is probably like old dude talk to them, and yes, get off my lawn now. But I think it's really, there's a certain aspect of just, what would I say to my 15-year-old self? I'd say just, have some faith. Everything is going to work out.
Right.
Even if it's scarier than fuck, because it
Right.
frequently is.
Right.
Just do your best at everything you can. And it all sounds so cliche, but man, ultimately, you're going to end up where you need to be.
And you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
So there's fear and there's blame. When you're in something that's not feeling good, you maybe need somebody to say, stop blaming yourself.
Yeah.
This is what you're doing. It's not easy.
Yeah.
So there's the whole human nature. We can't treat everybody out there, particularly all the students, as if they are all machines. They're all different, and we all have different emotional makeup. We all have different experience. We all have different, needs.
And we're all drawn to different things.
Yeah. So there are some skills in that area. I personally believe in meditation. I wish I had been doing it steadily.
I have
all through
struggled with it off and on for years,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's very beneficial to me when I can do it. But, the problem is that most people who need meditation have trouble turning their brains off.
Yeah. That's the hardest part. But
Yeah.
it's like anything else. If you keep
doing it. Yeah.
and it gets better, it gets in.
Muscle memory.
You start to feel the benefits. But I think in addition to all the career path things, there are other resources that young folks need, whatever that is.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think young folks tend to not pay attention to is self-care.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
mean that in the sense, when you bring up meditation, that's part of it. But it's just the whole idea that, we are invincible, we are indestructible when we are in our 20s,
Right.
And that's great. And it's, it's what enables us to experience so much. But at the same time, I think, you also have to take that time to step back and take a breath and, take care of yourself.
Right. Right.
Because that also, you only get one chance at that too. And that's why so many people in our industry don't make it to a ripe old age. So
Yeah.
here we are, a couple of old guys talking about that. But I think this has been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, fun.
Peter Chaikin, thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm honored to be here and really touched that you asked me to be a part of it, and I hope we'll keep it going.
Oh, absolutely. Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.